Hello, it's Blue coming to you live from Teatro Olimpico to bring to you the great Booster Wars of 2025. Okay, I think you get the point now with the old timey voice, but as Old Fashioned Blue mentioned, this video is going to go over the alternate game type for Altered known as Booster Wars. Altered as a TCG has a variety of game modes you can play, including standard constructed, limited, multiplayer, and much more. But today, you will learn how you can play a game of the Altered TCG with just two packs, one for you and one for your friend slash rival. But we can get into the rules here in a moment. Let's get into a little bit of a shameless plug real quick. Be sure to like and most definitely subscribe. It helps boost my already massive ego. Now, enough of that, and let's get into the rules for this format. Yes, no one likes rules, especially yours truly, but we need them in order to understand how to play the game. So you'll start with one pack per player. You must play the hero in that pack, and then you'll shuffle the remaining cards without looking at them, and that'll be your deck. Note, you'll probably want to remove the token or the foiler before you start shuffling. Don't want that to be part of your draws. There's also some special circumstances while you're playing the game, and we'll start off with this one, and that's infinite mana. No need to mana at the beginning of the turn. Draw 3 cards per day, including the first, and you'll also play 4 days total, and if you're tied at the end of it, you go into an arena tiebreaker. Some slight variations may exist for some people in playing Booster Wars, even naming it differently, but this is how I do it, and I'll get you started. But enough of that, and let's get on to the actual gameplay. Okay, we're going to be starting off here with some gameplay. We'll be going over 2 games total, one using Beyond the Gates packs and one using Trial by Frost packs. So 2 games that we got going here. Some slight variations you'll notice with Booster Wars, obviously with different cards. I'm not going to do like a full commentary like I would for some other games because I don't think it's as relevant. I'll probably just give some thoughts as we go along here and give you some updates as far as how this format works in particular. But yeah, as you can see, we have an Akesha versus a Sigismar. Sigismar, as usual, is still quite good in this format. It never hurts to have an extra body out on the board, and we just so happen to get a Ordis Recruit token in one of our packs. So makes it a little bit easier here. Do want to apologize ahead of time for the slight glare that you'll be seeing on some cards. I'll still be putting up the cards as they come down in case you do not recognize them as they are played, but we'll see how it goes and just let them appear as they come up, and I'll talk about stuff as we go. With Booster Wars as a whole here, and you'll potentially notice, is the first day is a little bit difficult because you don't really know what's in your deck and what to expect. Obviously, things that let you resupply or draw are quite good. Hopefully, you can pull together some type of removal as well. And then occasionally, you'll just get cards like that is just played where you don't know if you have anything that can play off it, like rolling dice, and most oftentimes, especially in Beyond the Gates with so many cards, you're probably not going to run into it. So it is unfortunate on some occasions, but it's what makes the format a little bit of fun and plays a little bit random because you can play cards that you wouldn't typically normally play on occasion. And sometimes you'll play cards that are quite good, like the Hydracina, but as we find out, sometimes all it takes is one good removal, and it doesn't even matter if you have a big Hydracina that you can play day one because you have infinite mana. But things like that Harvest are quite good, especially when it lets you go through your entire deck as a whole and figure out what you actually have available to you. You can figure out pretty quickly if you can compete or if you think you're just lost in the woods, if you will. This is Beyond the Gates, though. Anyway, but yeah, so we're on day 2 already. We went a 1 for 1. Want to apologize there for the acrylic hero and companion stuff. I know it's hard to see and I've had to deal with it myself, but I still played it on this recording. We do get to see a fun little Loki play, not played very often, but in this format, it is a killer because realistically, you just get to draw a bunch and see a bunch of what's going on. Lets your opponent do it as well. But sometimes you can plan around it and let them pass first before playing it. Doesn't be the case here, as we see another wonderful use of the Ouroboros being played. And then with that fleeting into a Dorothy Gale, that's what I was talking about earlier as far as getting rid of big characters that you thought would be around for a while just because of the luck of a draw and some type of removal. And this is a spot where Kesha's not looking too bright. Hero powers are another thing that you can take a look at with this type of format that can vary a little bit. And this is one of the things that I mentioned as far as some slight variations that you might run into. I'm not sure how others play it, but with these two, it doesn't quite matter. Kesha, you can pretty much always use it. Not as effective because there's infinite mana and you can't play around your opponent passing other than by the amount of cards they have realistically. But Sigismar, like I mentioned, always quite nice. There's some other heroes that have some weird interactions. I think one of the biggest ones is Finn and Crowbar, where traditionally you would put a card into your mana automatically at noon and then also resupply. But in this format, and I'm not quite sure how others do this, and but the way I've played it before is you always play the positive benefit of a potential negative with the heroes, where the Finn will still get the resupply, but you don't lose a card to mana since you have infinite mana. And at this point, if there's anything that sends something to mana, it's pretty much a negative because that means you can't use it. It doesn't go back in your deck. You can't reshuffle it. And with only playing one pack rather as a deck, you don't quite want to lose a card at any point by having it go to mana. That being said, one of the things that does come up here in this game in particular, you don't get to see it, but I do happen to have a mana channeling in my pack that I just don't ever play because it would be a net negative, other than the fact that I could use it as just another card as an after you if I thought that my opponent couldn't play anything and I wanted to, but I would lose a card in the process. So realistically, I think it's more of a gambit thing, and that's why I like playing it that way and how I played it with other people, where it's you don't take it out, but you more often than not are not going to use it unless it's potentially the last day. And you want to just play a card kind of thing, and you can risk losing a card basically. And with only 4 days, that can come up in general. But as you can see here, something like a gigantic Kaibara can be quite good in this format. Unlimited mana, and you'll see that harvest come out here on the bottom of the screen as well. As we see that reserve build out ever constantly, and we see those Ouroboros sit out and do absolutely nothing because no one has any type of rolling dice in their packs. Other than that, it kind of just becomes a resource game. And at this point, both players know what they have in their packs, especially with a card like Loki helping both players cycle through everything, including using things like Harvest and maintaining a giant reserve. And you don't really have to worry about losing stuff a lot of the time when you're playing stuff from reserve because you can just play infinite mana. You do have to worry about it a little bit when you're drawing because you can play a lot of stuff from hand, but you still have to discard down to 2 cards in your reserve at the end of the day. It's not as big of a deal in this format because I mean, you can probably get through those cards and get them back in your hand fairly quickly with only having a pack size deck. So it doesn't matter quite as much, but always something to pay attention to a little bit as far as when you're playing this format. You'll also notice that sometimes it takes a little bit of time to figure out what you're going to do. Like I mentioned, some of these cards you probably haven't played before or you have very limited experience with in a competitive setting. So trying to figure that out, and realistically trying to do all the counting here. As you can see, the board state for the top player is getting quite massive with all the different characters available, including that Kaibara, which is gigantic. Found that the council is actually a pretty decent card in this format as well. Kind of dissuades your opponent from playing on that side, but also having decent stats, and you don't have to worry about paying a whole lot because, hey, infinite mana. And we'll probably look into it a little bit later on the Trial by Frost game, but there are some cards that let you quote unquote pay extra, and you can basically get that pay extra for free. Shout out to Rare Pathfinder, I guess. Not in this game, but one card that we definitely do not see in the competitive format very much on the Bravo side of things, but a lot of stuff can have, I guess, that extra, pay a little bit extra to do something type of thing. And we don't really value that very often in these decks because a lot of it is, at least from a structured setup, is play low to the ground and don't pay extra for anything if you can help it. Other than that, obviously a lot of going on at the board at this point, but not too much to talk through. Didn't we didn't get to see the Kesha use all that much, and then we see cards like Mechanical Training pop up that don't exactly help you, especially if your only permanent, for example, is the Ouroboros. Would have been great if it was a draw on a permanent, but not happening here. Things like Ozma, though, can be quite nice to let you draw and see more cards. Because I mentioned before, the main resources in this game, or this format rather, is the cards you have in hand and in your reserve, rather than mana, or rather than both in a structured format. So that's usually what you'll want to play around with. Some other outlying items with this format will be coming up here on the final day, with the top player up 2 expeditions after getting a 2-0 in that previous day. So bottom player will need to get a 2-0 themselves to tie and head to arena tiebreaker. As we mentioned earlier on in the rules, you pretty much know at this point, with both players knowing both their decks, and realistically you know your opponent's deck, what each can do, and it just is a determining of what can you get out. And not always, but sometimes you'll run into a situation where one pack is just really dominant over the other, and you have to take advantage of that early on and hope that your opponent doesn't find a way to circle around it. I've definitely played a game where my opponent got 2 Conjuring Seals and a bunch of card draw that essentially let them after you constantly, and they were just drawing their entire quote unquote deck before, by the time I played every card that I had, even if I had a lot of draw or something, and they could just wait and play how they wanted around it. Shout out to you, John, you lucky bastard. Anyway, um, top player obviously also putting on a huge board here, getting a boosted Kaibara. Gonna be difficult to beat, especially if you know your deck, and at some point you can figure out exactly how many stats you can actually put on the board and know whether you can even compete on certain things, especially also if you don't have any removal. Especially, I'm saying that a lot. This is all live at this point, commentating this, but hope you're enjoying what you got going here. This game was definitely a fun one. Getting to play all these different characters, having a huge reserve, few useless permanents as far as the Ouroboros are concerned, but not too bad. Don't think we've gotten to see the Akesha use the hero ability too much. Don't think it has mattered all that much with the amount of draw that we've seen with the Loki, the Ozmas, and the Harvestas. Harvestas? Harvest? cards. Wow. Anyway, we're looking at a pretty big board here for the Sigismar player that I don't think the bottom Akesha is going to be able to catch up with here, especially only occupying one side. And we're going into the final, this being the final day. So it's not going to quite matter. We are getting some counting done, as you may be able to hear in the background, as this video is also sped up a little bit, so that way we don't have to sit through the slow play and thinking of how we're going to play these packs. And we do get a 2-0 from the Sigismar, and that being the final day, we'll see a GG, and the Sigismar takes this game in the Beyond the Gates setup here, and we'll get straight into the Trial by Frost. All right, Booster War number 2. This time we have the Trial by Frost packs. Would be quite interesting to get into a Trial by Frost versus Beyond the Gates Booster War. Might have to try that out next time. But this time around, we have an interesting one between Basiro and Basiro. I don't know why I said it that way. Basira and versus Arjun. I could actually see both being pretty good here, depending on what cards you're able to draw, as far as in your deck, quote unquote, pack. Other than that, talked about a lot of stuff in the previous game with Beyond the Gates, but same stuff here. I'll put the cards up, especially with those glare issues that you can potentially see, and you can tell what is played. But same things apply. Trial by Frost is obviously a little bit different as far as cards that are available. Less cards in general, so you may run into things that you find more useful or yet less useful, realistically. And here's one of those situations where I mentioned before with the Snoozer Shroom, where you can actually use that additional effect that it has because you have infinite mana. And it doesn't quite matter if you pay extra or not for it. You do have to decide down to those 2 cards, like I mentioned, in your reserve, but a lot of the times it doesn't matter if you can run into enough draw or resupply as a whole. But yeah, with Trial by Frost, it's a fun little setup, especially if you can manage to get the right cards for things like your Icebound permanents that we can see on the board, and potentially throwing those out there to get a dragon. Obviously, sometimes you won't have the token in order to produce the dragon, but you can figure it out. Things like the magic beans are always a fun one, especially when you can change things to just forest terrain. You also have a lot of things that introduce boosts, like that Saskia for the Arjun that could be fun. And even other things like the moth larva that has the potential to boost, but not always going to happen, especially with the idea of having to deal with exhaust, and maybe you just don't run into an exhaust card. But with what you have going, and especially if you know the sets well enough, you can get a general idea of the possibilities. With Trial by Frost, you definitely have a little bit more reliability on things that may show up in your pack. You could run into an exhaust setup. Your opponent could run into an exhaust setup, and you may be able to utilize that, as a lot of the exhaust effects rely on both reserves potentially being exhausted, but not always the case, and you can run into a variety of different issues with that as well. One of the things that we've noticed here is haven't seen a lot of usage of either hero ability, and sometimes that'll definitely be the scenario where you can't use it at all. Luckily, the Basira player should be able to utilize it in some capacity, with either with that moth larva, the magic beans providing a boost, or with other cards that they have. The Arjun can definitely still use theirs, as you'll definitely have cards in reserve. It's just a matter of, do you want to lose those resources that you have in reserve as far as a character, when, like I mentioned before, It's usually better to keep as many cards as you can so you can always be the last person or last player to play and decide how you want to set up the board to potentially win or advance on your particular expedition. But I can also see the value in getting a card anchored. We do see the activation here of that Icebound Lake being played. Sometimes the rares are better. Sometimes as you know, all rare changes are just cost reduction, which doesn't super help you in this format. But yeah, we do see a Break the Ice there. Card that I think a lot of folks thought was going to be used more when we saw Trial by Frost come out, but haven't seen a lot of. But any type of removal realistically comes in pretty clutch here, especially when you don't have to worry about the cost of it. I know Break the Ice has a cost reduction, but here it doesn't really matter. You could do the check if you want to, but doesn't really benefit you either way. We do see that Trailblazer come out, so another way to trigger that Basira hero power that we have going here. Some other notes as you play this game mode, and some things that I've seen as far as variations are people using a shorter tumult track. Don't think you necessarily need to. Playing 4 days, you can technically still advance and have your hero and your companion meet. So could be in it something that you can set up, but not always necessary. Could be a way to just vary the game up a little bit though if you wanted to try it. All this stuff is just different game modes that are made up along the way. So if you find something that you like in particular, why not give it a try? I know there's a lot of other types of setups or people trying out past things like Booster Wars or multiplayer or even free for all. And it's always fun when a community can get together and just make some stuff up that they find fun. Realistically, having a little bit of variety and getting past the usual structured setup or even just limited draft and sealed can be some fun. Although I do like both of those, and it's always a fun time when you can get some people together and do those events. So definitely can encourage that for any of you folks out there that may have a sealed or a draft coming up. Be sure to sign up. Take a look at it. Maybe one of these times I'll do a video on limited as a whole. But for the time being, I do wanted to show this fun little game type as far as Booster Wars. Super simple, doesn't require a lot of cards. In fact, all it requires is 2 packs. So if you're bored and have some extra packs or you want to support your local game store, you can just go ahead and do that by buying 2 packs and playing one of your friends. But other than that, went through a lot of everything that I have as far as thoughts with this game type. We're coming up to, I believe, the third day here for this game. The bottom Basira is slightly ahead at this point by 1 expedition. Again, apologies for the acrylic tokens. We had some scenarios with some cards being left on the board. Still haven't gotten to see the Argent used that much. And honestly, that's sometimes something you can forget, especially if you aren't used to a particular hero and you play it for the first time or maybe the second time in this format, and you just kind of forget to utilize it in a particular way. But it's all good. This type of format in general is just fun. I don't see this becoming a competitive thing that Equinox will have in the future. So, whenever you have some extra time, I would definitely suggest just giving it a try. And worst case scenario, you get to open a pack. Best case scenario, you have some fun and get to play some cards that you're not used to playing. And it's a good way to learn the other cards in any particular set that you may not know about. Save some reading time in the future for future structured games, especially with the Tumult Championship coming up for a lot of you. I know I just had my first one. That was a lot of fun. As we see an avalanche come out here for the Basira on the Arjun. Pretty big removal that I'd have to definitely appreciate being able to play. That's one of the harder things in this format is hoping you get some type of removal. Chances are you're going to get enough characters to play, but if you can get some removal, it definitely will help. We do see the top Arjun here playing Geyser. As I mentioned before with mana channeling, it's definitely a card you're probably not going to want to send to your mana. Just utilize the card itself as a removal and be done with it, I think. That way you're not actually losing a card for future days as a whole. We do see the Basiro maintain a lead thus far in this game. I believe we're coming up here on potentially one of the final days. Maybe we have another day afterwards, but Basira only one up, so definitely the ability for the Arjun to come back. Honestly, if you want to play more than 4 days as well, I know I'm having a tough time tracking it here, and maybe I'll note it down later when I edit this video. But not a big deal if you play more than 4 days. If you're having fun and you think the game's back and forth enough, go for it. I think the best idea is the 4 days when possible because a lot of the times you already know where the game is going to go. So it doesn't really matter once you get to a certain point and you either can catch up or you can't. And around the 4 day mark is where you can figure that out. You've probably already gone through your deck slash pack at least once, if not more. And so has your opponent. So not a lot changing at that point, especially if you're able to get every single card that you have in your deck slash pack out on the board, or at least having been played, which is definitely a possibility in this format and what makes it pretty fun as a whole and why I like playing it whenever possible. When I have time, we do have more of those icebound permanents out for the Argent. This time, one that isn't as relevant, especially if you don't have anything that's going to exhaust themselves. But what can you do? We do see the Basira hero ability being able to be utilized a little bit there because we have two exhausted cards with the Moth Larva. Not a lot happening in that particular day, and we will see the double advance for the Basira. So this must be the final day here that we're going into. Maybe there was an extra day played. I'm not quite sure. But either way, this is looking like the final day that we'll see. The Basira is up by 3 expedition spots, so realistically, the Arjun cannot catch up even to a tie. So probably didn't need to play this particular day, but both players having fun. Go for it. See if you can catch up and see if you can change something around a little bit. If not, no big deal. At the end of the day, it's still just one pack and not that much time just to have a good time overall and playing a little bit of Altered, which is what we're all here for in the first place. I assume if you're watching this video, you enjoy a little bit of Altered here or there. That being said, not much more left to this game. Basira likely taking the victory. Well, will be taking the victory. We'll just see how this final day goes and see how it switches things up. I do want to take the time here to say thank you to anyone that has been watching this video and is learning about this format for the first time. This is Booster Wars. It's a fun little 2-pack format within Altered where you can play some cards you haven't played before, potentially, and go through your entire deck multiple times. But as we near the end of this video, once again, I would like to go into full sellout mode and ask any and all of you to subscribe to the channel, maybe throw a like and a comment for this particular video, and maybe watch some other videos. And yeah, other than that, appreciate you. Just subscribe. I know a lot of you aren't subscribing that are watching. But anyway, we're running to the end of the video here. The Basir locking things out. This has been Booster Wars. I am Blue. And once this game wraps up, I'll see you in play for the next day. Incorrect avalanche play, by the way.